Hello everyone, in this video we will be discussing important considerations for informed consent and talk about relevant legislation. Here we have the agenda for the video. First we will discuss what is informed consent, followed by informed consent regulations, then talking about the informed consent requirements, followed by elements of informed consent. Then we will talk about responsibilities for informed consent, followed by the informed consent process, consideration in obtaining informed consent, the certificate of confidentiality, enrollment note, assent, and how to get started. What is informed consent? This term has often been mistakenly viewed as synonymous with obtaining a subject signature on a consent form, which is incorrect. Informed consent involves providing a potential subject with adequate information to allow for an informed decision about participation in a clinical investigation, facilitating a potential subject's comprehension of information, providing adequate opportunity for a potential subject to ask questions and consider participation, obtaining subject's voluntary agreement to participate, and continuing to provide information as the clinical investigation progresses. Now we will talk about informed consent regulations. FDA's informed consent requirements set forth in FDA's Regulation of Protection Title 21, Part 50, states that you must meet the requirements of Title 21, Part 50, Section 20, and must include basic information as required by Title 21, Part 50, Section 25, Paragraph A. If the clinical investigation is conducted or supported by the Department of Health and Human Services and involves an FDA-regulated product, the study is subject to both Title 45, Part 46, and Title 21, Part 50, meaning that both must be followed. Regulations differ. The regulations that offer the greater protection to human subjects should be followed. Here we have some requirements for informed consent. The investigator shall seek consent only under circumstances that provide the prospective subject sufficient opportunity to consider whether or not to participate with minimal coercion. Information given to the subject or representative shall be in language understandable to the subject or representative. No informed consent, whether oral or written, may include any exculpatory language through which subject or representative is made to waiver or appear to waive any of the subject's legal rights. An example: I waive any possibility of compensation, including any right to sue, for injuries that I may receive as a result of participation in this research. No investigator may involve a human being as a subject in research covered by these regulations unless the investigator has obtained legally effective informed consent of subject. Next, we will discuss some elements of informed consent. In seeking informed consent, the following information shall be provided to each subject: a statement that the study involves research, an explanation of the purposes of the research and the expected duration of the subject's participation, a description of the procedures to be followed, an identification of any procedures which are experimental, a description of any reasonable foreseeable risks or discomforts to the subject, a statement describing extent, if any, to which confidentiality of records identifying the subject will be maintained, and that notes the possibility that the FDA may inspect the records. Please note that there is a total of 8 considerations. The remaining 3 considerations for elements of informed consent are listed below. For research involving more than minimal risk, an explanation as to whether any medical treatments are available if injury occurs, and, if so, what they consist of, or where further information may be obtained. As a recap, the elements of informed consent are summarized below. Here, we have additional elements of informed consent listed. When appropriate, one or more of the following elements of this information shall also be provided to each subject. Next, we will discuss the responsibilities for informed consent. IRBs ensure that there is an adequate informed consent process that protects rights and welfares of subjects participating in clinical investigations. They also complete the following responsibilities: review all informed consent material, and review of consent process. Next, we will talk about the informed consent process. This begins with subject recruitment. It includes advertising to recruit subjects in a clinical trial. After identification of a potential subject, a person knowledgeable about the clinical investigation and capable of answering questions should conduct a consent interview. The subject then fills out a consent form, and oftentimes the process continues even after signing with the form. Additional information may need to be given to the subject, and the subject may need additional opportunities to ask questions and receive answers. Now we will talk about consideration in obtaining an informed consent. It's important to remember that obtaining an informed consent for a research study differs from standard of care consents. The research-informed consent process is held to a high standard because of the historical events which led to its regulations. When obtaining an informed consent, it's important to remember participants should be given adequate time to consider participation. The entire consent form should be reviewed with the participant. Each person involved in the consent process should sign, print, and date it for themselves. Do not pre-populate any information. Also, ensure that your document has an accurate enrollment note. The Certificate of Confidentiality, or COC, are an important tool to protect the privacy of research study participants. They're issued by the NIH to protect identifiable research informed from forced disclosure. They allow an investigator and others who have access to research records to refuse to disclose identifying information on research participants in any civil, criminal, administrative, legislative, or other proceeding. They help achieve research objective and promote participant studies by assuring confidentiality and privacy to participants. To get a COC, you identify a funding source for the COC request and then use online Certificate of Confidentiality system to provide required information. The link for doing both of these steps are listed below, and the NIH link. Next, we will discuss the Enrollment Note. Your Enrollment Note is your legal documentation of a properly conducted informed consent. Be sure to document the entire process and anything that may be unique to the participant. This will be the official record in the event of an audit. Some things that should be included in an enrollment note are the date or time the note is written, identification of the protocol the subject is being enrolled to, statement that the subject meets inclusion criteria and does not meet any of the exclusion criteria, statement that the informed consent was obtained prior to any study procedures being performed, statement that the subject or legal representative was given an opportunity to ask questions, and signature and date of the IRB approved investigator. Now we will briefly talk about assent. Assent means a child's affirmative agreement to take part in a clinical investigation. Child assent, when appropriate, and parental or guardian permission taken together meet the ethical requirement to obtain informed consent. Ultimately, the IRB determines whether assent of child participant is appropriate. The child does not need to fully understand the clinical investigation in order to provide assent, provided the child is capable of understanding interventions and related procedures. How to get started. An institution routinely provides templates for informed consent forms. If you have created your own consent document, it is best to utilize these forms, as it will ensure that you cover all required aspects of an informed consent form. There are records provided templates here in this link below, and on the webpage under B, Consent Templates. In sponsored clinical trials, the sponsor usually provides a consent form. Often you will need to fill in your institutional specific information. Please work with your IRB to ensure that the consent form is in compliance for both parties. Thank you for listening to this video. For assistance with submission and regulatory concerns, please contact the Regulatory Support Office for a free consultation. Below, we have an NJX Regulatory Support Office link that will take you directly to the page.